The back room of the Sallow Bakery smelled of scorched rye and cold iron, and it was the cold iron that Ina had come for. 40 minutes before the ovens were lit, in the blue dark of a February morning in 1934, she knelt behind the brick hearth where the heat never reached and worked the dial of a squat black safe with fingers that knew it the way they knew dough. The tumblers fell, a click, and a third. She set inside a canvas sack, heavy as a sleeping cat, laid a ledger bound in oilcloth beside it, and did not count the coins again, because she had counted them the night before and the night before that. She was 36 years old. She was not hiding the gold from any man then living. She was keeping it for a girl who would not be born for 2 more generations. A girl she would never meet. And everything that came after is only the long account of how that girl found her way back to this wall. Maren Sallow was 20 years old, and for 3 days her whole address had been a 2003 Corolla with a cracked taillight in the far corner of the family fair lot on the edge of Halvard, Minnesota. She had $18.40, a quarter tank of gas, and a dented green tin box on the passenger seat that had belonged to 4 women before her. The car smelled of cold vinyl, and the burnt coffee ghost of a gas station cup she had made lasted 2 days. When she breathed, she could see it. Her father had been dead 11 weeks. Ansel Sallow, 65, had gone down on the floor of the shop he still opened at 4 each morning. And by the time the estate had passed through his second wife's hands, there was nothing left with Maren's name on it but that tin and a folded paper she hadn't yet made herself read. 9 miles north, on the good side of the lake, Sondra Merrick was almost certainly awake by now, because Sondra rose early to be seen rising. Early, she would be standing on heated tile in the kitchen that used to be the Sallow family's, thumbing her phone, a Cartier tank watch loose on a wrist that had never carried a bread tray. The house had radiant floors and a $9,000 espresso machine, and Maren's mother's garden buried under a poured patio. Maren pressed her cold hands between her knees and thought, without drama, the way you note the weather, she took the house that had my mother in it, and she left me a car. She reached for the manila envelope in the door pocket and finally slid the paper out, a deed. An iron key, long as her hand, taped to the corner. The property at 211 Vermilion Street. The old bake shop boarded up before Maren was born. The collapsed east wing fenced off by the city condemned. The one thing they had let her keep. She turned the key over. It weighed more than it should have. What was a dead building worth to a girl with nowhere to sleep? And why had they been so eager to hand it over? The settlement had been signed on a Tuesday 11 days earlier, in a conference room on the 4th floor of the only glass building in Halvard, where the heat was turned up too high and the water came in little sealed bottles that no one opened. Sondra arrived 12 minutes late, which was a message. She wore camel cashmere and a scarf that cost more than Ansel's truck, and she set a white Range Rover key fob on the table like a paperweight. Her lawyer, a soft young man from Duluth, laid out folders. Maren had come alone. She was 19 days past her 20th birthday and had not slept, and she signed things when soft young men slid them across tables because grief makes you obedient, and everyone in that room was counting on it. Here is the thing to understand about Sondra Merrick, and it will matter later. She believed only in numbers that someone had already written down. A bank statement was real to her. A signed appraisal was real. Anything without a price tag, a garden, a recipe, a building full of 40-year dust. She filed under liability and cleared away without looking twice. It was the whole of her, and it was the flaw that would take her apart. The estate, as she had assembled it on paper, was thin. The house, in her name now by a deed Ansel had signed the year he married her. The accounts, joint a small ongoing bread route and its 2 vans, going to her. Line by line the soft lawyer read the numbers, and line by line they landed on Sondra's side of the page, and she nodded at each one like a woman approving a menu. To Maren went the property at 211 Vermilion Street, together with all fixtures, contents, and appurtenances contained therein, condemned, tax-burdened, one collapsed wing, and the tin. Sondra had physically pushed the green box across the table with 2 fingers, the way you return something a stranger dropped. "Your father kept that ruin out of sentiment," she said. "Sentiment doesn't pay. When the city finally tears it down, at least you'll have had one thing with your name on it." She capped her pen. "That's more than most girls get." Maren did not cry, and she did not argue. She had watched this woman for 4 years and understood that tears were currency Sondra enjoyed collecting. So she folded her hands over the cold tin, said "thank you" in a voice with nothing in it, and let the silence sit there until the soft lawyer cleared his throat. Out in the parking ramp alone, she opened the tin. Index cards in 3 different hands, a cloth-bound notebook gone soft at the corners, and on top, in a spidery old script she'd known her whole life, her great-grandmother Ina's rye recipe, the one Ansel had taught her from when she was 6, standing on a milk crate to reach the board. Ina's rye. Flour, water, salt, the old starter, and below that underlined twice, 34,821. Turn it 3 times and never change the count. For you, Titter, she'd thought those numbers were oven talk her whole life. She held the card a long moment, not knowing yet why her thumb wouldn't leave it. She spent $9 of her 18 on gas, and drove into town before dawn on the 4th day, because a person can only stare at a deed for so long before the deed starts to feel like an accusation. Halvard sits at the tired end of the Mesabi Range, a mining town the mines had mostly finished with, 41 miles of 2-lane and frost-heaved county road between the lake and the highway. Vermilion Street had been the main street once. Now it was a row of soaped-over windows, and 211 Hen 1 stood on the corner of around 1 wing and a city notice Sioux. Fence zip-tied to the door, orange, official, water-stained, the key fought her. Then the lock gave with a sound like a cough, and she stepped inside, and the past came at her, in the right order, the way real places always do. First the smell. Flour turned to dust, and something mineral underneath, cold stone, old smoke, soaked so deep into the brick that 90 winters hadn't pulled it out. Then the cold itself, a different cold than outside, the still cold of a cellar, settling on her face and hands. Then sound. Nothing. A nothing so complete, she could hear the fence ticking in the wind outside and her own blood. Only last did her eyes catch up. The long marble counter under a sheet of grime, the black bulk of the bake oven filling the back wall like a sleeping animal. A milk crate still standing beside the board where a child had once been set to reach. It was worse than she'd let herself imagine. The east wing had come down into the alley, rafters splayed like ribs. Water had gotten in for years. A pigeon burst up from somewhere, and she pressed her back to the wall until her heart came down. And she thought, standing in the ruin of everything her family had been, that she should sell the lot for whatever the fence and the rubble would let her get and never come did. She had her hand on the door. Then she stayed. Not because anything called to her, but because she had spent 3 nights in a car, and this was, for the length of an afternoon, a roof and a sallow had built it, and she was tired of being moved along. She walked the room to warm up. And walking it, she stopped. The oven wall was wrong. She had grown up in bakeries. She knew how they were laid, knew a hearth to the inch. This one sat a good 1.5 feet proud of the foundation line. She could see where the plaster had fallen. The brick beside the oven mouth was a different color from the rest. Grayer mortar, a later hand, and when she rapped it with her knuckle, low, it did not answer like a wall. It answered hollow. She found a rusted pry bar in the fallen wing and came back to the gray brick, and she worked. The first course would not come. The mortar was old and stubborn, and she skinned 2 knuckles before a single brick shifted, and when it finally slid free, it took a breath of colder air out of the dark behind it, air that had not moved since before her father was born. She reached in to the elbow and felt iron, smooth, painted iron, and a raised curve that could only be one thing. She took out brick after brick, an hour of it, her shoulders burning, until the thing stood revealed in the grey afternoon light. A squat safe, the size of a small stove, black beneath the dust, a brass dial gone green at the centre, and worn nearly to nothing above it, a maker's name from a city that no longer made such things, a hinge the width of her thumb. It had been built into the wall, and then walled over, hidden by someone who did not want it, found by anyone who did not already know it was there. She gripped the dial and turned, and it turned, and she tried her father's birthday and her own, and got nothing but the small dead click of a lock that owed her nothing. She sat back on her heels in the cold, and the tin was in her coat, and the recipe card came up in her hand almost before she'd decided to reach for it. 34, 8, 21. Turn it 3 times and never change the count. No baker on earth measures a rye like that. She had known those numbers her whole life, and never once heard them as what they were. Her hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. Right to 34, left past 0 once, to 8, right to 21. 3 turns. The Count Einar had hidden in plain sight on a card a child would carry her whole life and never think to read. The last tumbler dropped like a small bell. The door did not swing. It had to be hauled, groaning on its hinge, and the dark inside gave itself up slowly. First the smell, oiled canvas, old paper, a faint sweetness of cedar. Then her fingers found the sacks, 4 of them, heavy in a way that made no sense for their size, and she loosened the neck of the nearest and tilted it toward the light. Gold. Not bright. The deep, buttered gold of coins that have never been to a bank. Double eagles stacked and rolled and packed close, hundreds of them, cold and heavy and real against her palm. She did not shout. She sat very still on the cold stone floor and let one coin turn over in her fingers, a woman on it striding into a sun that had risen in this town 90 times since the coin was hidden, and she understood in stages, the way you understand a death, not all at once, but in a slow rising tide, that she was not poor anymore, and that she had never really understood who her people were. Under the sacks lay the oilcloth ledger and a cedar box, and inside the box a letter in Einar's hand, dated the winter of 1961. If you are reading this, then you are mine, and you are the one who kept the door open when it would have been easier to walk away. Maren read it once fast and once slow. Einar wrote of 1931, when the bank on Chestnut Street closed its doors on a Monday, and a whole street of mining families lost every dollar they had saved by men who moved numbers in a city they'd never see. She wrote that she had watched Toivo Kangas sign his house away to feed his children, and had made herself a promise that her town would never again be at the mercy of anyone who weighs a life by what's written in a ledger and calls the rest worthless. So she had kept the gold. Some paid to her, some bought cheap when neighbors needed cash. None of it ever spent. The town's spine held in the dark. Money in a wall feeds no one, she wrote. When you find it, do not become one of the counting people. Keep the oven warm. Keep the bread coming. And know that I loved you across all this time, though I never got to see your face. Maren was still holding the letter, and no one there to spend them on. And when she heard, out in the grey street, a car door close, then a second one, boots on the walk. The condemned notice door pushed open without a knock, and Sondra Merrick stepped into the ruin in cream wool and clean boots, her breath clouding, the soft young lawyer behind her with a leather folder held against his chest. A little clerk at the county called me, Sondra said, looking at the pried open wall, the tools, the dust on Maren's hands. But not, Maren noticed, all the way into the dark of the safe. Said you'd been in pulling permits and asking questions about my corner. So, she smiled the way she smiled. What are we doing, sweetheart? Playing house in the rubble. My corner. That was the first tell. Maren stayed on the floor, put herself else between the woman and the open iron, and said nothing, which had always been the one move Sondra couldn't read. The demand came out reasonable, because Sondra's demands always did. Northgate Development had been quietly buying the block for 2 years. The bank had already committed against the assembled parcels. The whole project waited on this one corner. The building was condemned, had helped see to that, and scheduled for demolition by the city in 11 days. You can't live here. You can't fix it. And after the crews come through, you'll be trying to sell a hole in the ground, she said, and the soft lawyer slid a single page from the folder onto the dusty counter. So I'm doing you a kindness. Sign the lot over now. Today, and I'll give you $31,000, which is $31,000 more than a pile of brick is worth. Or wait, watch it get knocked down at your expense, and get nothing. She tapped the page. On the counter beside it, without meaning to, she set down the leather folder. And Maren saw, clipped inside it, the estate settlement, the one she herself had signed 11 days before. Sondra's own drafted copy, with her own signature at the foot of it. The building's already yours, as is, per our agreement, Sondra said, and there was the second tell, the one she didn't know she'd given. Everything in it, everything wrong with it, I made sure of that. She meant the liability. She was proud of how cleanly she had made the ruin Maren's problem. 11 days, she said. Then it's gone. Be smart for once. Maren looked at the settlement, clipped in that folder, and at the demolition date, and at the 4 heavy sacks in the dark behind her, and something in her went very still, and very fast at the same time. I'll need until Friday to think, she said quietly. Sondra took it for fear. That was fine. Fear was a language she trusted. Friday, she said, and turned on her clean boot heel, already elsewhere. By Friday, Maren had not been thinking. She had been working, the way Ina worked, before the ovens in the dark where no one was watching. She did 2 things Sondra never imagined a broke girl in a car could do. First, she did not sell a single coin, and did not tell a soul she'd found them. She drove the sacks and the ledger to Duluth in the Corolla with a blanket over the passenger seat, hired an estate lawyer named Francis Okafor on a slice of the future, and had every last piece moved under seal into a bank vault, and photographed and counted by a numismatist named Emmett Rausch, who took one look and went quiet, and then said the coins alone. 489 St. Gordon's double eagles, 31 older Liberty pieces, a scatter of dates he wanted to examine under better light, came to $2,410,000 before anyone talked about the deeded 40 acres of lakeshore folded in the ledger. Second, she used Sondra's own paper against her. Francis Okafor read the settlement Sondra had drafted, and the clause Sondra was so proud of. The property together with all fixtures, contents, and appurtenances contained therein, and smiled the way lawyers smile when the other side has signed their own name to the knife. She recorded Maren's clear title, filed to halt the demolition on the grounds of a pending contents claim and historical record, and set a meeting. They met back at 211 Vermilion, because Maren wanted the wall in the room. Francis came, and a woman from the county recorder's office, and old Aino Mackey, 88, whose father had signed a house away in 1931 and whose name was in Ina's ledger under Forgiven. Sondra swept in, expecting a signature and a scared girl. Sanator, soft lawyer, came behind with his folder, and for the length of one sentence the whole thing still belonged to her. Then Francis Okafor laid 3 documents on the marble counter. Side by side, Sondra's eyes moved across them. The recorded title, the numismatist's sealed appraisal, and her own settlement, her own signature, the clause she had written to dump a liability now conveying, in her own airtight hand, everything that had been inside the wall. Maren watched the exact moment it reached her, watched the color go, watched the confident line of her mouth come apart, watched her reach for the settlement and then stop, because she recognized the handwriting as her own. She had signed the town's fortune over to a homeless girl with her own pen to save herself the cost of a demolition. That's the contents were never. Sondra started and could not finish, because there was nowhere for the sentence to go. Behind her, the soft young lawyer had already closed his folder and taken one step back, the way people do when they realize they are on the wrong side of a room. Maren stood up from beside the open safe. Her hands were still dusty. She was not shaking now. "You said something to me at that table," she said. "You said sentiment doesn't pay." She let it sit in the cold the way she'd let every silence sit. "You were right that it didn't pay you," Maren said. "It paid her 90 years in the dark, waiting for someone who wouldn't spend it on herself." She looked at the wall, and then back. "My great-grandmother was the most sentimental woman this town ever had, and she just bought back everything you took." Sondra had no number for that. For the first time in 4 years, she stood in a room and could not find the price of the thing in front of her, and it broke over her face like weather. Maren walked past her, out through the condemned door, into the plain, flat daylight of Vermilion Street. The gold was the smaller reckoning. Francis Okafor's filing forced a real audit of an estate Sondra had rushed through probate, and the audit found what rushing usually hides: assets undervalued, 2 accounts left off the inventory, a widow who had told the court one number, and her own drafting table another. Northgate Development had borrowed against a corner it would never own. When the loan came due and the fraud findings came public, the bank called the note and the investors ran. The company dissolved that autumn. A civil judgment of $680,000 was entered against Sondra Merrick for what she'd concealed. The lake house with the poured patio was lined and sold to satisfy it, and by the following spring she had left Halvard for somewhere no one had ever tasted the bread. The soft young lawyer testified for the other side. Maren reopened the bakery. Not the ruin on the corner. She braced the good wing, cleaned the marbles save the black oven, and left the safe in the wall, with its door standing open where anyone could see it was empty now. Sallow's Bake Shop. The sign said again, in the same plain letters. She put the 40 Lakeshore acres into a trust that pays for the ovens, and every Monday, the day the Chestnut Street Bank once shut its doors on this town, the bread goes out at no charge to whoever comes, and old Aino Mackie sits by the window and tells anyone who'll listen about a Finnish woman who kept a whole street alive in the bad years. On a February morning almost exactly a year after 3 nights in a car, and Maren stood in the warm back room before the light came up, the smell of rye and wood smoke thick enough to lean on, and handed a hot loaf across the counter to a man with cold hands, the way a woman had once knelt in this same dark and hidden a fortune for a girl she'd never meet. The vault was never the gold. It was one woman's promise to people who had nothing, kept in the dark for 90 years, until it finally reached the single hand that would open the door and give it away, if someone ever told you that being overlooked meant being worth less. Go tell them how this ended.